Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Max with BuzzTox here, and I am back with a Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 5 reaction and review, where I give my initial reaction on the latest episode of Game of Thrones to break. And to be honest, this is one of the worst forms of writing I have seen in television or movie history. Not only was the focal point on baseless, overdramatic action scenes that really held not much weight, it undermined some of our pivotal favorite characters for the last 8 seasons. We've been waiting 8 years for Daenerys to finally reach King's Landing. And we had an episode that focused primarily on Arya Stark, who has all of a sudden become the face of Game of Thrones, sidelining Jon to a simple secondary character, and turning Daenerys into this mad queen. And we've spent 8 seasons with her, and we know that that is not the case. And not only did they completely dehumanize Daenerys, they did everything in their power to humanize Cersei, even though that's been the exact opposite of her character for the last couple of seasons. And during this moment that we've been waiting for, we focus on plots that really, of the scheme of things, do not matter. We spent a huge chunk of the time while King's Landing burned to the ground watching the Hound get revenge on his brother. Why is the Hound getting his revenge over his brother Gregor Clegane more important than Daenerys sitting the throne? And what's so important about seeing Euron battle Jaime? There's no emotional stakes watching Euron fight Jaime. It was pointless, senseless action. Maybe focus on the emotion that's been set up for the last 8 seasons, with Daenerys trying to claim the Iron Throne. And why was Cersei humanized to the point where she wanted her child to live? And she just wanted to live and be with Jaime. It would have been useful if she realized that a couple seasons ago. So just in quick summary, this episode was a mess. The action had no stakes and it had no meaning. Our favorite characters were reduced to stereotypes, and other character arcs were just altered for the sake of telling this very one-sided story. Plot points have been focused on that weren't important whatsoever. And after watching 8 seasons of the main cast, watching Jon Snow start off as a Snow, work his way to Lord Commander, become the King in the North, and then find out he's a Targaryen, and then with Daenerys, have her rise in Essos, earn the Dothraki, save the slaves and gain the respect of the Unsullied, sail to Westeros to make the world a better place, to turn those characters into nothing but side characters, to turn the character of Jon Snow into just simply a victim, and to turn Daenerys into nothing but a mad queen. It undermines the 2 pillars of the show, fire and ice, and they destroyed these 2 characters and made room for another. They for some reason decided to make Arya Stark the main character of this season. And because of that, it undermines the story they've set up for the last 8 seasons. It undermines the 2 main characters of the entire show. And it turns a great secondary character into somebody I despise now. Because there's no room for any other character to breathe because they're filling it with Arya Stark. Arya Stark is the one to kill the Night King. Arya Stark is the one we watch during the battle for King's Landing. And Arya Stark is going to be the one we watch in episode 6 when she's probably going to kill Daenerys. Even though the Night King was Jon Snow's fight. He spent 7 seasons dedicating himself to fighting the dead. Even though King's Landing was Daenerys' fight. She spent 7 seasons fighting for King's Landing and the Iron Throne. But nope, those characters aren't important. Arya Stark is important. And the producers of the show have decided that Jon and Daenerys aren't important and Arya is the one we need to follow through the rest of this story. And outside of Arya, other characters were incredibly undermined. Varys lasted 2 seconds after deciding he would support Jon Snow. He didn't do anything to change the favor of support from Daenerys to Jon. Daenerys did that herself because the showrunners decided that she was nothing but an angry queen. Varys went straight up to Jon and told him he should be king, something that Varys would never do. He's the spider. He would conspire to put Jon on the throne. So he made a quick end, ruining his character. And then there's Tyrion, who for the last 2 seasons has done nothing but make mistake after mistake. All he did was set Jaime free, which having Jaime be captured in the first place was pointless. Why didn't they just skip to Jaime arriving at King's Landing? There was no purpose in him being captured. And then there's the Hound. I thought over the last 8 seasons he might have learned something. That revenge isn't as important and maybe he'd find a connection with Arya. And he wouldn't be driven by revenge. That's character growth and character development. Like what they almost established when he came back in season 6. But that's not important now. Now he has to kill his brother. Some pointless quest that took up so much of the show's energy. We've been waiting 8 years for this, and we spent the majority of the screen time watching the Hound fight his brother. which was pointless and senseless action that had no stakes. I wasn't invested in the mountain at all. I was invested in Daenerys, Jon, Cersei, and many other characters. And then there's Daenerys, and she's probably the biggest tragedy of this whole episode. I was the biggest voice saying that Daenerys was going to burn King's Landing. But not out of her being angry, but because she was forced to. Daenerys doesn't sensibly kill people like this. She wants to make the world a better place. I would understand if she burned the Red Keep or maybe burned some civilians by accident in an attempt to get Cersei because she wouldn't stop. But instead, Cersei surrendered and Daenerys just decided to go on a murder spree and kill all of King's Landing. How does that make any sense? How does that back up Daenerys' character? It undermines everything of who she is. But then the showrunners decided to make Cersei empathetic towards us. Make Cersei surrender. Wouldn't it make more sense to have Cersei not surrender to force Daenerys to do something rash? That's what would make sense, not making Daenerys become a mad queen like her father, because over the last 8 seasons we know that that's not her character. But for some reason the screenwriters gave the empathy from Daenerys and must have confused it with Cersei, because Cersei became a totally different character, and her want to live and to have her child, and her surprise that she was losing should have come up long ago. Last episode we saw Cersei was ruthless. What changed? And then there's the Golden Company, who were just made a giant joke. 20,000 men strong, destroyed in 10 seconds. And then there's Jaime. We wasted 4 episodes watching Jaime come to terms with who he was, and try and become a better person. All for him to default to who he was, to go to his sister, to rescue her. And the send-off of one of our favorite characters, Jaime, is him being attacked by Euron, this character we don't care about, and then die in the rubble of Daenerys, who for some reason became the biggest murderer in the show. And before the Hound's death, Arya and the Hound did have a good scene. That was probably the only part of this episode I liked, when the Hound told Arya not to be like him. But this episode spent way too much time on Arya, it spent way too much time on the Hound. And it put all of our favorite characters on the back seat, because apparently they're not important. But at this point, I am honestly in shock. I cannot believe this episode ended the way it did. I cannot believe it was written so poorly by people who wrote this show for the last 8 years. This was a huge disservice to the fans, and a huge disservice to our favorite characters. Jon is more than just a soldier. He's a man of integrity, honor, which we saw, but he's also a secret Targaryen ruler. And Daenerys is not just a mad queen. She's actually a very kind and empathetic person who listens to her counsel. She would never decide to murder civilians. And then you have Cersei. But those characters are just sidelined for Arya, who all of a sudden is the epitome of Game of Thrones. So I am honestly at a loss. Daenerys is going to sit on the rubble of the Iron Throne, and she's going to rule the 10 people left that she didn't murder. Jon retreated, so he's probably going to show up. But now it's clear Arya is after Daenerys, and I wouldn't blame her. So at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Daenerys wants to execute every single one of our favorite characters, because according to the producers of the show, now she's crazy. I wouldn't be surprised if Arya now kills Daenerys, because Arya has to be the significant person in every single plot of every single character. And I wouldn't be surprised if some random person is going to take up ruling the 7 kingdoms, because this show has shown that there's no plot direction, there's no motivation, and there's no destination we're going with this plot. And just to justify my opinions on the episode, I would make these changes. I said over and over again that Daenerys would burn King's Landing to the ground. Every time she tried to be civil, Cersei would kill a portion of her armies. She would outsmart her at every turn. But what we saw this episode is that by nature Daenerys was evil. Cersei surrendered and she decided to kill civilians anyway. And that also undermines Cersei's character, where she never stood down to Daenerys before. Wouldn't it make more sense for Cersei to never surrender? Keep killing, keep burning people with wildfire, and Daenerys has to step up and burn the Red Keep out of desperation, not out of anger. And that would tarnish her reputation, and that would be the tragedy of Daenerys' character. But now there's no tragedy to her character because they turned her into a villain. And then there's the focus on the people in King's Landing. Arya should not have been the one who was in the rubble of King's Landing. It should have been Jon. Imagine how much more emotional it would have been if we saw Jon in the ashes of King's Landing, that was burned to the ground by the woman that he loves. And it would have so much more stakes for the next episode, because of the big mistake Jon must feel of supporting Daenerys. So just like the last couple episodes, I feel like this episode was meant to subvert our expectations. It went against every character that we knew, and it focused on characters that weren't as important. I would have loved to watch an episode with Jon, Daenerys, Cersei, Jaime, and Tyrion, but instead I feel like I got half the episode with them and the rest of the episode with the Hound and Arya. So all in all, a huge disappointment. So that's my opinion on this episode. Please let me know what you think in the comment section down below. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.